I think these industries, if you allow AI companies without payment or permission to build a highly scalable competitor that's much cheaper and quicker to use, it's clear that a lot of these industries are going to be totally gutted.
We're here to talk about generative AI, how they train their models, and how that's impacting creative communities. And both of you have been working on this issue and are tackling it from similar yet very complementary angles. Luke, you're a filmmaker. Tell us a little bit about how you got into this issue and what Overlay is doing.
Yeah, so I got my start on YouTube. I love kind of that creator economy. People can just upload from anywhere and get followers and get connected to their audience. And I started to see this wave of disruption coming from AI and the way it's been set up and the way they've been training. And so I kind of banded together with our co-founders, Paul Nicklin and Christina Mittermeier, who are, top National Geographic photographers. And we started to just think about like how this was going to play out and then what tools we could build now to kind of get ahead of it and protect ourselves. Really, we started there. And then we started to go like, how could we expand this to give it to more creators and more creators? So Overlay is really just an app that assigns all the necessary metadata and new metadata as it comes along in this kind of evolving world to give creators as much protection as we can possibly provide.
Some of whom may be familiar with how generative AI trains their models, some may not. Ed, can you kind of walk us through, as a former AI executive yourself, can you walk us through how training works?
Yeah, so at a high level, these generative AI models only work because of the content that they're fed. So we call it, in the industry, it's kind of termed learning. It's actually like pretty different to human learning, but it's a helpful metaphor. Essentially, what a lot of AI companies do is they gather as much content as they can, generally from scraping the internet. They download all of it, and they train a model to be able to create, new work that is in the style of that work, essentially. And of course, a lot of the time, there's sort of regurgitations of what went in and that sort of thing. But ultimately, the intention, I think, is to try to create, work in that style. And so this is true across text generation, things like ChatGPT. It's true across art generation, things like Midjourney. It's true across music generation. And it's really true across the creative industries. The same kinds of models are being used across the board. And unfortunately, the same kind of approach is being used by a lot of AI companies pretty suddenly, just in the last couple of years or so, which is basically an approach that says, we're just going to gather as much information as content as we can, and we're going to train our models on that. And yeah, that's roughly how they're doing it.
Right. And traditionally, you'd have to license that work. Like if you were using, a photograph from Paul Nicklin, you'd have to license that work.
In basically every instance in the past, yeah. This is kind of like the first time I've witnessed it at this scale, towards just like, no, we're not going to license anything.
And it's funny. I totally agree. And it's funny, like for years, I've been in generative AI since long before we called it generative AI. I started in 2010. And for really a long time, up until about 2022, no one released commercial models trained on copyrighted work. Basically, it was understood that you would not do that because you'd get sued. And then in 2022, these people have been working on research models behind the scenes, and they started working really well. And a few companies, I guess, decided to release them. And they're companies, we've all heard of. And then, those companies, I think, did so well and raised so much money that there's been this total rapid domino effect where just the entire AI industry has kind of followed suit and just thought, well, if they can get away with it, maybe we can. And that's because like lawsuits take time to put together, right? The first ones came in pretty quickly, but, and so what you have now is an AI industry that very suddenly has made scraping copyrighted work and using it to build, what's essentially a replacement for much of that work, has adopted that as basically the norm. And as Luke says, like, generally in the past, when commercial entities have needed to use copyrighted work to, to build something, they'd license it, right? They'd pay for it. So yeah, I mean, this seems to me to be a very different approach from previous technologies.
And the reason they can get these, the reason we've seen these hyper realistic images is because they're based on photography. They're based on photographers' work. Talk us through what we're seeing right now and the experience, the tests that you ran.
So I think there's like a couple things to dive into here, but one of them is we tried to keep it really simple just to show different photographers what was going on. So we kept it to just like the photographer's name and then the word photo. So in this case, it was Paul Nicklin photo was the only prompt. I didn't say anything about wildlife. I didn't say anything about, the Arctic or anything like that. And that's what it gave back. So to us, that was a pretty clear indicator that his content's all in there in some form. When we get into their work and the work that they do, like they're conservationists, they're always going and trying to capture, the current state of different climates, species, different things like that. The first thing Paul noticed was like, that's a spirit bear on the right, the fake one, the bottom right, but with the polar bear's feet. Simply because like in the training data, they didn't have, enough training data to properly put together the spirit bear. It just kind of pulled the spirit bear and then threw some polar bear feet on there. And I'm sure Ed could dive into that a bit more, but we just found that super interesting. Like that could lead to all sort of terrible things, terrible outcomes, right?
Yeah, that's fascinating because that first
out.
Look, like I, not having any knowledge of the specificities of the polar bear family, I would have not known that had you not told me. And tell us a little bit, I'm curious about, this is a unique style. The photographs on the left, Paul Nicklin, he's known for a very unique style of photography. And it takes a lot of money.
Yeah, I would even say with his style, it's more about the time and the effort that goes into capturing it, which he gets into it a bit, but it could be as much as 6 months, right? Like trekking to this location, spending days on end, not getting anything useful, and then being there in that perfect moment to capture that. That's obviously very valuable stuff. And the business model that he relies on to go out and capture that data is fragile. It's not like bulletproof. So if we start messing with these new business models that are, fairly new in the social media age, algorithms start to change, the internet's flooded with AI content, they're going to be replaced pretty quickly just from an exposure standpoint and algorithm share standpoint. So I think AI companies really need to think long and hard about like how long they're going to need organic data, and if they want to be messing with these fragile business models of the people out there capturing this stuff.
You strongly believe that they were trained on work that would have been licensed. And in this case, this photographer, Paul Nicklin, and the others, we have other examples as well, but the others, did they receive any compensation for this?
No. And I mean, another good example is Ansel Adams. You can type Ansel Adams photo and get his stuff back. They are very strict with where they license his work, and it's never been cleared for that use. So yeah, there's no payment. And then the companies that do this are kind of receiving the bulk of that payment.
Yeah, these are just some of the other tests that you ran. And, Ed, I think this is a good segue into the big push that you've made with your statement and now 50,000 creatives signing on. I mean, this is exactly what the statement is talking about.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's important to remember that while these examples are obviously totally egregious, and you see them across domains, you see them in text, you see them in music, you see pop music coming out of some of these systems sometimes. While they're egregious, there's a broader issue here, which is that even when these things aren't creating something in the specific style of a certain artist, what they're still doing is they're still taking basically the world's creators' life's work, and they're ingesting that, and they're using that to build a crazily scalable competitor to those creators and to that work, right? And there's a bunch of examples already where, people are losing work and their work is less valuable because AI companies have taken it and have this replacement machine. So, so even outside of style regurgitation, like this, which is obviously awful, there's a broader issue here. And yes, so, this statement that we put together is meant to just be a very short, simple statement, because I think short, simple statements can be powerful. And just is meant to show the extreme strength and breadth of feeling, around this question at the moment. We hear a lot from AI companies who have a lot of money to lobby governments, right, and get the word out. It's generally harder for individual creators to have their voices heard. Recently in the UK government has actually suggested upending copyright law and allowing AI companies access to all this content. At the moment, it's illegal in the UK. I had a bunch of creators come to me and say, what can we do about this, right? People, these are professional creators. Maybe not many people have heard of them, but they're saying, look, they're stealing our work and they're going to put us out of a job by doing this. What can we do? And honestly, it's hard to know what to do. But I think one thing we can do is we can shine a light on this view, and we can say, well, look, every time an AI company says, hey, what we're doing is good for creativity, is good for creators, we can say, well, is it really? Like, are you paying them? Are you asking permission, like, to build this competitor to them using their work? Obviously, you're not.
Is it too late now, since the damage has been, to a certain extent, done? What can be done moving forward?
I mean, I can't speak for what people are hoping for, apart from the fact they've signed this statement. And I'm sure there are a lot of different views among the 15,000 and counting signatories here. There'll be people who just don't like AI at all. There'll be people who like AI and want to use it, but only want to use, licensed models. There'll be a whole range of views. Personally, what I'd like to see is for starters, I'd like governments not to change hundreds of years of established copyright law to introduce exceptions to copyright law that allow AI companies to take creators' life's work and build competitors to them. I mean, that feels like table stakes here, and I'd like to see governments not introduce that. I'd like that to be the broader way the discussion goes, and ultimately I'd like to see more AI companies starting to pay creators, and I'd like to get a fairer deal for creators in the age of generative AI. Is it too late? I don't think so. I mean, again, it can feel like it's too late because so many people use this product or that product. Like, OpenAI is worth $157 billion. It must be too late. But it's in simple timescale terms. We're talking about 2 years, like things that and it always takes regulators and frankly the courts time to respond to things. So I actually don't think it's too late. And I think if we make it as clear as we can that the creative community does not accept this and does not accept it as fair in any way, maybe we can affect it. I mean, who knows, but all you can do is try.
And Luke, as these creatives wait for regulation or a legislation and the law to kind of come pick up with the times, Overlay has a solution right now for photographers who are posting online. Can you walk us through how it works?
I think we do. I mean, we're trying to, right? So what we're essentially doing is taking all of the available metadata that is out there that could help photographers or creators. And that comes in the form of C2PA, which we're starting to see a lot more adoption of. Like Google has said they will recognize C2PA metadata in Google search and YouTube, and we're starting to see that roll out. And then but we're not committed to just, one bit of metadata. We want to assign copyright. We want to do IPTC, and we want to stack all of these statements up and put them in one place and take the best available statements for photographers and put them in one place. But the underlying issue has been that metadata is consistently stripped. As soon as you do anything with your content, you upload it to a website, any statements that you might have attached to that piece of data are gone. And so these standards are important because they are starting to establish ways to keep that metadata attached to the file. And if it does get stripped, different ways of calling it back and going, hey, I found this picture. I don't know who owns the picture or who took it. And here's a way I can find that out. It seems like, honestly, work that should have been done on the internet a long time ago. But it's, the generative AI push has kind of taken everybody collectively to come together and go, we should probably figure this out. And everybody has their own reasons for doing that. But what I like to see is that it's happening. And I think creators can benefit from that work.
And the content credentials C2PA is really about transparency and traceability, giving users online the ability to understand where a piece of content comes from. In terms of overlay, how are you hoping it might help creatives, especially photographers? Paul Nicklin is joining to help launch the app, or as part of the effort. How would a photographer be able to protect his work using overlay?
Like, we tried to make it as simple as possible. It's an iPhone app. You simply just take your photos from your library on your phone, add the protections, and then it's ready to share online. Obviously, different companies like Google, they look at the metadata directly. And then we also have an invisible watermark that's fairly robust, so that if it does get stripped on one of these social media apps like Twitter's fairly well known for just like discarding all that stuff, we can attach it back to the file via our watermark. So it's pretty simple. We tried to make it easy and for everybody to use, but it's not bulletproof, right? Like, I think a lot of these things, I don't know if there will ever be a bulletproof tech solution. So it's kind of like with what Ed's doing, it's on us to kind of keep up on it and apply the pressure on multiple fronts if we actually want to do anything here.
And you have a do not train component to it, right?
Yes. So there is a do not train component, and that's using the C2PA. There's also on the IPTC metadata side, I believe they might have a do not train component as well. But as you can see there on the B-roll, we stack that metadata and we stack those assertions instead of just, putting all our eggs in one basket, one standard. We want to adopt multiple, and we think more will come. It's looking like potentially Sony and Japan might have their own. So that would be something we would add.
Yeah, it seems like we're moving towards a world where we're going to see more of these digital standards and more of this transparency applied.
Yeah, and the reason that the reasoning for these companies adopting it might not be this, they're not doing it for ethical reasons. They're doing it for housekeeping. But at the end of the day, like I said, I think creators can take advantage of that.
And then, Ed, you have a solution when it comes to data sets. A company, if they wanted to use a data set that was based on licensed work, you launched a nonprofit called Fairly Trained. Tell us more about how that works.
Yeah, so Fairly Trained is really a trust mark. It's a certification badge. We give it to companies, generative AI companies that don't train on copyrighted work without a license. We've certified 18 companies to date, and really, it's it's to try to elevate these companies and show that there is an alternative. You don't have to go and scrape copyrighted work and use it without permission. So that's what we're doing, and I think that I think, as Luke says, you need all sorts of things. Like you need protections, like overlay and others. You need these things as well. You need certification badges. I mean, one of the things that I think a lot about is you need the ability to opt out of training right now, unfortunately, because everyone is just training on your work. This in itself is totally unfair. The burden should not be on the creator to use metadata to opt out of AI training. Opt-outs, for better or worse, tend to get missed. Most people never realize they can opt out of this training. I've run opt-out schemes for AI companies, and even the most well-run schemes get missed by most people because, frankly, you never hear about it. You never see the email, if that's how it works. Like, maybe there are a few different protocols you can use. You don't quite know how they work. You don't know which one to use. I think if a government really thought that AI training was kind of a good thing for creators, it wouldn't create an opt-out scheme. You create an opt-out scheme if you basically know that no one's going to go for this and you want it to happen anyway. If you think it's a good thing for creators, you create an opt-in scheme because they'll all be jumping at it. And the fact that, AI companies don't tend to be advocating for that, I think tells you all you need to know about whether they think creators want this or not.
My last question to both of you is, if we don't get this right, what happens to the creative community? And this is a global issue. It's not just the US, UK, Europe, right?
I kind of always approach this question of like, I think you need to look beyond that and go, we have to get it right to set precedent for how AI will interact with every profession, right? And so I think it's even a little bit bigger than that. But I do feel like I'm optimistic. I do feel like creators will bounce back. A lot of this will bounce back, but it won't happen if nobody does anything, right? It does require people putting in work, people organizing. But I'm fairly optimistic that things will bounce back.
I do think if we don't get this right, then, a lot of the creative industries are in a lot of trouble. I think you're basically going to see a lot of the current creative industries, especially the parts, probably the vast majority that come from people who aren't necessarily household names, right? Be it background music composing, be it much photography, be it lots of illustration, be it lots of writing and journalism. I think these industries, if you allow AI companies without payment or permission to build a highly scalable competitor that's much cheaper and quicker to use, it's clear that a lot of these industries are going to be totally gutted. So I think we have to get it right for that reason.